I had the feeling that I was in danger. I got out of the area and felt all right. I couldn't get out of that area fast enough. My name is Michael Hexum. I'm known as Pops in the Bigfoot community. I got interested in this when I was about 14 years old. I was out hunting and I had a Bigfoot walk into my deer stand at about 20 feet away and was standing there looking around. And I wasn't sure what I was looking at. It looked like a dark person, all, dark fur, dark clothing or whatever, and a prehistoric face on it. And I want to say 30, 40 seconds went by, and I finally said, "Hey," and it turned and looked at me and looked bewildered and took 3 steps and was gone into the cedar trees. I couldn't see it anymore. That was my first encounter. Um, up here in northern Minnesota, hunting is a tradition. Back when I was a kid, they put meat on the table. So, we were out in the woods quite a bit hunting and trapping when I was a kid growing up.
I think a lot of people have experienced that, grew up, in a hunting community. I know I did. So I can understand the experience out in the woods. But this was the first time you actually saw this creature. And how did you respond to that?
Kind of disbelief. I couldn't figure out what I had just seen. It was getting later in the afternoon, so I packed up all my gear and got out of the woods, basically. Met up with my dad, told him what I had seen, and we went back the next day to that area. And I said this thing was standing underneath a tree. The branch was about a foot above his head. And we determined that this thing was about at least 7 foot tall. At that point, my dad told me not to mention this to anybody. He didn't want to be embarrassed or anything like that. So I kind of just forgot about it. Um, as time went on, I got more involved with this again and my other experiences and that.
Did you start talking about it, or did you just start investigating some?
A little of both. Throughout the years, back in that same area, I had encounters which I didn't know what they were at the time. I had wood knocks. I found tree structures. I was actually followed a few times in the woods. I could sense I was being followed. And I really didn't know what any of this was. It was just kind of creepy. I've been followed by animals in the woods, by moose and by bear. That's common up here in northern Minnesota. I've actually been treed twice by moose. But talking to people, some of the locals up here when I was, probably in my late teens, talking to some people about what I had seen. Some of the old timers up here, the loggers, and that would tell me stories of what they seen out in the woods that would conclude what I seen. And then as time went on, I just started doing more researching, and then a lot of these things became clear to me. Exactly what I was experiencing. It was not just something weird. It was actually happening to me.
What are some of your other encounters?
Well, a few years back, I was in an area in the morning and it was just snowed. And I could hear tree knocking real clear as day. And then it went away. And then later that evening, I heard it again. I walked out to where my vehicle was, and I was the only vehicle in there. There was no other set of tracks. And then and there, I knew that was tree knocking. There was no doubt about it. They were warning the rest of them that I was in the area. And this was there again in a cedar grove that I'd walked into. That was interesting. So I knew that was definitely tree knocking. I've had a lot of things happen to me. I've had stuff thrown at me at night, branches, rocks, stuff like that thrown at me at night in the woods. I think the worst I've ever had was, you ever heard of what they call infrasound? Um, Animals, gorillas, such are able to put out a signal or whatever that can either lull their prey or scare their prey away. It's called infrasound. Um, First time I had it happen to me, I was in an area hunting, and it was a real peaceful looking area. There was a river running through it, tall stands of pines, like a park area. All of a sudden, I had the feeling that I was in danger. I couldn't get out of that area fast enough. When I left the area, I was all right. I didn't have that feeling anymore. It was just a really weird feeling. Second time I had infrasound on me, I was in another area, and I felt like I was having a heart attack. I got out of the area and felt all right. I went back in that area again, and I started having panic attacks. I never have panic attacks. That lasted throughout most of the afternoon, and then when I left the area, I was fine. But that was also during hunting. Um, Also, earlier that morning, they were throwing stuff at me up in my stand. I was getting rocks and branches thrown at me. And I believe the reason for that is July, prior to opening a hunting, July, I brought the film crew in of Finding Bigfoot. We did a show back in that area. And I think they were mad at me for doing that, like I betrayed them. And that goes along with another story. I feel that I actually grew up with a clan of them throughout the years back in that area. They know who I am. They leave me alone because I don't bother them. I go in and do what I got to do and I leave. But they know who I am. They have left me gifts. Uh, like I say, I've heard tree knocking. I've been watched, followed. And there's a lot of interesting things throughout the years.
So have you found structures then on that property that you feel like you had the clan that was present in your youth?
Yes, I found about six TP structures, and I went and asked my dad what he thought they could be, and we thought maybe some hunters had gone in there and set up a camp, but they were just the poles sticking up. It looked like six of these structures back in, and it was by a swamp. The only problem is that the area that we were in was not accessible to the main public at the time. It was a game reserve and it was closed, but we were allowed access in it. So my dad said there was no way anybody could be in there but us. And but that's back before I knew. I was still learning. So to this date today, I can go in the same area. There's no evidence of any tree structures in there. They have moved out of that area. And there again, the structures had nothing around them. They were just poles. It was really kind of interesting. I wish I would have had a camera back in those days.
So what do you think caused them to move out of the area?
Well, the area was eventually opened up to public hunting, so they had more and more people in there. They're still in the area. Um, I've had some encounters over the last couple of years in there with them, and one was most recent was a mumble talk that they make. Very interesting. And I had talked to a friend of mine's, Ron Moorhead. Him and I were talking about it, and I actually mimicked mumble talk. And he told me, he says, yeah, it's exactly what he's heard. It's just spot on what he's heard in the woods. And but yeah, I was back in an area. I was clearing a trail. I was by myself, and I just gotten off my four-wheeler. I was going to get my chainsaw out, and I heard this mumble talk, this meow, 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 meow. And a few minutes later, another one answered it, and they were about probably 30 feet apart. So I stood there what I believe was about a half an hour, and the two of them connected together. They were doing mumble talk and they were moving closer together. Unfortunately, it was in September. The undergrowth, the brush in the ring was still pretty thick. I could not see more than about 25, 30 feet into the woods. My first thought was to walk in there and go check them out. But then I thought, no, I'm all by myself. I'm back in 6 miles on an old road, logging road, and then another 3 miles into the woods from the logging trail. And I'm by myself. I figured the best bet was just do what I was going to do and get out of there. But that was very interesting.
Ron Moore had confirmed that that was also the type of sound that he had heard.
Yes. Yeah, Ron confirmed that was exactly what he's heard as well. Very similar. Some will call it a samurai talk, or excuse me, samurai talk.
Have you researched any other area besides that area in Minnesota?
I've done a lot of research basically over northern Minnesota, up on the Indian reservation and that lake. I was up there with some friends of mine that live on the reservation. We were back pretty close to the border on the reservation, and we heard what they would describe as Ohio howls. And we were standing there. I had night vision out. I seen something get up behind a log pile. I can't say what it was. It could have been a bear. It stood straight up and was looking at us. I got it on night vision, and then it ducked back down and disappeared. So I'm thinking it could have been a bear because it crawled away or whatever. But in the course of that night, I had heard what they do, a oh, and then about a minute later, another one answered it, did the exact same haul, and then the coyotes started going nuts. The coyotes, you could just hear the coyotes around us going crazy. And one of the guys that was with us, it shocked him so bad that he went and got in his truck and sat in there. He didn't want to get out of his pickup truck. But it was by far one of the creepiest sounds I've ever heard in my life. And I've heard everything up here in northern Minnesota, believe me.
How much do you get out and research?
Well, where I live right now, I've had experiences where I live in a cabin on a small lake. The nearest town is about 20 miles away, and it's a small town. So I've had stuff going on here. But, basically every time I get out in the woods, I've got my eyes on the back of my head going. I'm watching and looking, and I found some interesting things. But I try to get out quite a bit. Um, but we've had things happen here, so we don't have to go too far. My wife has gone out in the yard at night and felt like something was watching her. Numerous times we've had rocks thrown up on the roof of the cabin at night. And then back in 2008, I watched one walk across the ice in the middle of winter. That was really cool.
What did it look like? Can you describe it for me?
Yeah, it was upright, uh, two legs, very dark in color. It walked out of what is the boat landing, and it was, I want to say it was not middle of winter, it was March, because ice on top of the lake was all melted, so I couldn't get a foot track. It walked across the lake on the other side over to another property, which was probably, I want to say, about 6 blocks away. It walked it in a matter of minutes. There's no way I could walk that fast and that distance. And it was kind of interesting because, back, that was 2008. I didn't have running water up here yet. I'd go down on the ice every day and get water for the sauna and water for doing dishes. And I would go out in the morning and stand out there until the sun came up and watch the sun come up. And this is when this thing crossed out across the lake. It was at first light, and I could see it pretty clear though. The lake is not that wide.
Was the lake frozen through? How did it hold the weight of the Bigfoot?
Yeah, it was frozen through, but just slush. I mean, the snow had all melted pretty much and it was just all slushy water. You really couldn't see any definitive tracks or anything like that. I walked over there and checked it out, and then I went back on the property, and of course there was no tracks, there was no snow. I couldn't find anything, and the property had a gate across its driveway coming in, so there was nobody there. That early in the year, we get I call them cabin people. They come up and they'll spend the summer or they spend weekends, but for the majority of the year they're not here. It's just me and a few other people that live on the lake. But it's pretty secluded here.
How often do you have either visuals or some kind of contact with Bigfoot in that area?
It comes and goes. I don't get anything for a year, maybe a year and a half. I don't see something, and then all of a sudden something will happen. And uh, like I say, other than the wife telling me she could, we could hear something hitting the roof at night. And this happened back in 2008 too. I was having something banging on the wall of the cabin at night, hitting the outside wall, and then rocks being thrown up on the roof at night. And at that time, I had a 100-pound chocolate lab. He would hide under the kitchen table and just shake and growl. He wouldn't even get out from under the table. And I've had reports from people I know just north of me, 3-4 miles. Um, Another guy on the lake next to mine that there's no people living on. Him and his grandson were out fishing in the morning, and they had rocks thrown at them from the shoreline. I get a lot of reports around this area, and then a lot of them around more to the west. I get a lot of reports around Big Fork and FE and some of them areas. One very cool one, I had a Task County sheriff get a hold of me, and he showed me his dash cam video, and he had one crossing a state highway that's just north of or west of me about 11 miles. And I watched this thing cross the highway on his dash cam video, and he wanted just to me to concur what I had seen, and I go, yeah, it's definitely a Bigfoot. There's no way this thing could cross the highway in 3 footsteps, or bounds. I asked for a copy of the video, which he said no, he could not do that. I've worked with the DNR in the past. I've actually seen photos and videos the DNR had taken from a helicopter. Same thing, these things walking along the power line, and I believe it was just north of me where they were walking. Same thing, they would not give me a copy of anything. I had another DNR officer or employee was doing water clarity checks on a river that was by here. He was chased off the site and back to his truck and was able to get out of there. It scared the living heck out of him. And I went back there and did an overnight with a couple other people. And we did get, we got parabolic ear set up. It's a dish you can hear long distances. We could hear something walking, and it was bipedal. You could hear it walking, and it would walk into the gravel on an old trail and then into the grass and then into the gravel again. And we could hear this walking. We followed it for a couple miles, and then it went into the woods and then disappeared. And then I thought I might have seen something across the river. There was something, a silhouette, but I couldn't be sure what that was. Well, that was interesting. That was all off a DNR report. Also, what was it? 9 years ago, I seen mountain lions up here in this area, and I actually photographed them. It just wasn't until a couple of years ago that the DNR admitted that we do have mountain lions up in this area. But I was seeing them 9, 10 years ago. I actually got them on video. So the DNR will come up to me occasionally and ask me questions on things that they're a mystery. Another one was a gal that lived a small town west of here. I believe she was just recently widowed. She had a cabin, same thing out in the woods, and this creature was looking at her through her picture window. I was contacted. The sheriff was there. You could actually see the palm prints on the glass. And I'm 6'2". I got a pretty good reach. The palm prints were wider than I could reach. And then the same thing they were actually doing like fingerprinting on the window. I never heard any more on that. I mean, unfortunately, the government will only tell you what they want you to know. But other than I visually seen what was going on, and I did see the imprints. And then there was imprints or the uh, palm markings on the window. I could see that. And then there was imprints on the ground, but not enough to make a track or a cast out of, which at that point I wouldn't have been allowed to do that either. So
Do you make casts now? Have you done that?
here's the funny thing about it. Most of the footprints I found were winter tracks in the snow. And we did not have the capability of casting tracks in the snow. Now we do. Um, Unfortunately, I haven't run across any tracks. The best ones I ever seen, I was able to take some pictures of them, but this thing was heavy enough that it broke through the snow, and I could see its toe imprints. I could see the tracks perfectly. Like I say, I'm 6'2". I have a size 14 shoe. I got a pretty good sized foot. My foot compared to this was like a troll. I mean, I just had tiny feet compared to the tracks I've seen. And then also the strides it was taking. There was no way I could make the strides. And I was walking on top of the snow or on top of it was same thing. It was late in the year. It was late in the winter. I was able to walk on top of the snow without breaking through. And I'm at that time I was 240 pounds. I was able to walk on top of the snow. And this thing was breaking through. It was so heavy. And that was in an area, I want to say that was about 20 miles northwest of me. And I had went in there looking for deer sheds, antlers, and came across this old trail and started walking on it. That's when I found the tracks.
What do you think these things are?
They say we're related to an ape. Um, these things, I've talked to a lot of people about it. I don't believe they're aliens. I don't believe any of that. Um, People say they can change positions or shapes. They can look differently, but if you're a hunter in the woods, the woods, the shadow from the sun and that can cause a lot of things to look different. I got a feeling what they do is if they're sneaking through the woods, they just get behind a tree and blend in, and it'll appear to make them look different, or they can disappear altogether. I believe they came across the land bridge back when they existed before the ice ages or whatever, and they're a direct descendant of us. It just never evolved, but yet they're intelligent enough to survive, in our world. I found I believe in the winter time they winter in the tamaracks, and it's reason for that is the tamaracks never really freeze. It's got that thick grass. It's almost like a mattress. I've actually taken a nap in the tamarack swamps in the summer. Winter or summertime, they primarily hang out in the cedars, and the cedars are a natural deterrent for bugs. So they're less likely to be harassed by mosquitoes and flies in the cedar groves.
Do you think they have any kind of special knowledge, or have you studied any of the Native American ideas about them?
Yeah, I have friends up on the reservation, um, and they call them shapeshifters or whatever. They're in fact the reservation I go to up there. They have a lot of history of them. And there again with the shape shifting, I can come to the conclusion that they're basically blending in. I've done that hunting. I've walked from tree to tree and blended in with the tree so I wouldn't scare the game that I was hunting. I think that's how the Indians are interpreting this. I don't think they change into another form or anything like that. But yeah, the native history goes back quite a ways on these things, through recorded history. They have an area up there, what they call a berry patch. And every fall, the women go in there and they pick berries, blueberries. And a few years back, they were getting chased out of there. So a friend of mine that lives up there, he got a hold of me, and I was allowed to go up there and spend some overnights out in that area. Um, we didn't see anything other than, we heard some really interesting stuff, some knocks and some hauls and stuff like that. This friend of mine also was leaving rock piles. He was doing out in the middle of the woods. He was piling up rocks like a little pyramid style, and he would go back in there a couple of days. The rocks would be moved in a different position, which I thought that was really interesting. Um, Same thing. I've left tobacco. I've left garlic out in the woods, and would go back 2 or 3 days later, and there would be the garlic would be gone. Um, There'd be a couple deer bones in its place, a couple leg bones or a rock or something on a tree stump. I was placing these things. Also, I've been left on my doorstep. I had a leg bone on my doorstep that was left. This was a couple years ago. Got up in the morning and went outside, and this leg bone was leaning up against my wall of the cabin by the door. It was kind of interesting. It was a femur bone off. I believe it might have been a deer, possibly a moose. It was a pretty good sized bone. And then out in the woods, in my deer stand, I had a rabbit that was left in my stand, up in my stand. I don't have a ground stand. And the only thing I could find on a rabbit is its neck was broken. There was no puncture wounds like it had been bit or anything like that. The neck was broken. And so I believe they were leaving me a gift. They were saying, hi, we know you're back in the area for hunting and that, and, we want to be friends.
Have you heard of other people in the area that that sort of thing happens to?
Not really. I mean, if it's happening, people aren't coming forward and talking about it. We got that Bigfoot conference coming up in October in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And I go to that every year, and it's kind of interesting because I'll have people come up to me and tell me their stories, and they're from around the area. And, I've never met them before. They know who I am. I'm considered the Bigfoot guy up here in northern Minnesota. And they'll tell me their stories, what's happened to them. And it's kind of interesting. Some of them have happened pretty close to where I live. There's another area too that's just north of me. Um, it's a trail that runs 11 miles. A couple years back, I was getting reports from the logging truck drivers. They were seeing these things crossing the highway, state highway, and then they were walking 11 miles on the other side of this 11 miles of another state highway. Truck drivers on that side of the highway were seeing, or that side of the woods were seeing the same type of creature. So I figured it out to be a trackway. That 11 miles, they go east to west, and then they go across the highway, Highway 65, I'll call it, and they go west from there because I found signs of them being back west of there. So yeah, there's definitely a trackway that they're using. They're moving east and west.
Think they use the rivers as kind of a system, a highway system?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know all my sightings and stuff that I've investigated and stuff that's happened to me has been close to a body of water, a lake, or a river. Um, Kind of interesting up in that area where I spend a lot of time. The Native Americans used to form cedar trees. They'd take the branches and bend them, and they would use them as a guide, a map to get to somewhere. And I found numerous trees like that where the branches are bent. But you got to realize too, these trees are well over 100 and some years old. These branches are bigger around than my leg. So they were shaped like that probably back in the last century. And I followed the actual pattern of trees going through the woods, and it came out to a lake where the trappers in that time, back in the 1800s, did more like blazing trees. They'd take an axe and make a mark on a tree, make a blaze. That's how they find their way through the woods. but I believe these Bigfoot have the same type of paths that they follow. How they mark them, I'm not exactly sure. They may, it may be a branch bent over, pointing in a direction. A lot of people show me structures, and I look at them, and some of them I can't explain, and some of them are just wind damage. But there was a line of trees where the branches were bent, half bent, or the trees were bent, half bent. There were smaller trees, and it was definitely somebody was marking a trail.
Those trails generally lead to water.
Yes.
Well, what else
Oh,
can you tell me that you've discovered about Bigfoot and in your years? And you do have quite a bit of information in the years that you've been really paying attention closely to all of this.
well, they primarily they're nocturnal. I've seen them in the daytime, um, 3 or 2 times in the daytime. Well, actually 3 times. Last time I seen one was just getting dark. Um, but they come out at night. They hide back in the swamps, basically tamarack or cedar swamps, and they come out at night and hunt. I've Up here we have deer trails. There are trails going through the woods that the deer follow, and some of the trails you can tell how old they are by how deep the dirt is knocked down. It's, like a trench. You can tell that the deer have used this trail for over 100, 200 years because they're deep trails. But what I've discovered, what they'll Bigfoot will do is they'll knock a tree down across the trail. So when the deer is walking down that trail, it have to go around the tree to get back on the trail again, and they'll be ambushed. Because I found skeleton remains out in the woods, and looking at the back leg bones, there's no bite marks in them, which would indicate that a wolf didn't take these down. Because normally a wolf kill, they'll go for the hind quarters, and you'll actually see the teeth marks in the legs. The back legs were literally shattered; they were broken, like something hit them. And I determined that to be a Bigfoot ambush. Same thing. I've had hunters tell me, they've shot deer and went for a walk for 3, 4 hours, came back to their deer stand, and the gut pile was gone. And that's a real sign that Bigfoot's in there, because normal gut pile will sit in the woods it can sit in the woods for a week before the birds and the scavengers clean it up. If it's gone in a matter of hours or the next morning it's gone, that's usually a sign of something bigger. Usually that time of year, deer season, the bears are in hibernation. So it's not the bears doing it. That's another interesting thing I discovered.
It sounds like you have really, put some effort into understanding where they are and why they're there and what the signs really are. Is there anything else you can tell us about that?
It's just I'm 66 years old. Uh, I grew up hunting and trapping with my dad and my uncle. Uh, you know, it's just you live this many years doing things in the woods, you just pick up on a lot of things. You can kind of what's right and what's not right. You know what's natural and what's not natural. Um, it's just something that you got to learn with, experience. I don't know everything. I'm learning new stuff every day. I'm not saying I'm an expert on Bigfoot. I'm still learning, but it's just growing up in life. Do what you do. You grow up living in the cities your whole life. You know about the cities. I go down to a city and I'm completely lost down there. I'm up here in the woods. I'm at home.